This video will cover asynchronous HTTP requests. If you'd rather not deal with async requests, you can use curl. For those of you on Windows, you will need an additional tool like Windows Bash or PowerShell. So let's go ahead and get started. As you will recall, in class we did a small npm application within which we created an HTTP request using the request package. So as you can see here, I have two windows side by side. On one, I have a terminal window opened up at the folder called HW. On the right hand side, I have a text editor where I will type my code. As you can see here, I have no content within that folder, and I'm going to go ahead and start off by running the npm init command, and this will guide me through a series of questions to generate the default config JSON file for this small little project that we're going to build right now. So I'm going to go with the default version. I'm going to say here sample async requests. I'm going to use the default for entry point, enter nothing. For the rest of the fields, I will enter MIT license. Then I will say, I will confirm that this is okay. And now if I list my files, you can see there that I have a package.json. If I look at the contents, you can see there that I have some initial configuration. Now the very next thing that I want to do is I want to install the request package, and to do that I will enter npm install request, which is the package I want, and then save --save to save it locally, and that will also create a dependency on my configuration file. And as you can see here, if I look at the package.json, you can see there that I now have a dependency. You can also see that I have a node modules folder. If I move into it, you will see all of the modules that were downloaded as a result of me installing the npm package request. I'll go ahead and repeat the example we did in class. I'll start off by creating a variable called request, and I will assign to it the result of requiring request. Let me go ahead and save that file. I will save it to my homework folder. As you can see, I'm already in there, and I will simply call it index.js. Now if I list my files here on the left hand side, you can see there that I now have index.js. Now I am going to make a request, and this request will take two parameters. One of them will be a URL. The second one will be a callback function that we will write next. And I'm going to first create the URL that we're going to pull down, and I will simply enter the MIT webpage, and the file we're looking for is index.html. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and write our callback. This is the function that will be called once that file is pulled, and three parameters are passed into it. One is error, the other one is response, and the last one is body. This is the body of the HTML page if the request is successful. We will check to make sure there are no errors, and that if that is the case, we will download we will write to the console the body of the page. Else we will do the same, except we will write out the error, right? So let's go ahead and enter that. And now we can go ahead and run this example. I'm going to go ahead and enter node index, and if all goes well, we will see the content of the page. And as you can see there, all of what you're seeing there is the content of MIT's homepage. So there's a lot of HTML, JavaScript, styling, and so on. And so you can see there that what we received right away was the content of the page. Now, one of the issues that you'll run into in the homework is that since async requests come from async requests, you may reach code that is going to handle that response before you have the response. So one of the challenges as you do requests or async requests is how do you handle this situation? And for that, we're going to use promises. And that's what I'm going to show you next. To do that, let's go ahead and create a new file. We'll call it promises. Let me go ahead and save that before we start writing any code. And inside of there, we're going to write promises. Now, promises are part of the JavaScript language, and they allow you to write blocks of code where you explicitly specified when something has resolved. And let me be more explicit. I will go ahead and create here a new promise. And inside of it, we will have a callback. This will be simply a function that takes two parameters. That's the resolve and reject. That means that you rejected. This was not resolved, this promise. And inside of it, we're simply going to write resolve and a message. In this case, we'll say message 1. What we can then do is chain a sequence of events deriving from this promise. So I will enter P, which is our promise, then, and then specify a function to handle the resolution of that promise. So I'm going to go ahead and write here message. This is the message that we would receive. And inside of it, we're going to write to the console the message that we received. Now we could continue this sequence using then. In this case, for a simple example, we will stop at this point. Let's go ahead and run this example. And as you can see there, we get the message 1 back. Now, if we were to add a timer to delay the resolution of this promise, the result would still be the same. So let's go ahead and show you that. So as you can see there, I've added a timer and I've put the resolution inside of the timer. So that part, line 3, will not be reached until the set timeout fires, which is within 3 seconds. However, as you will note, nothing will happen, meaning line 8 will not write to the console until that block of code has been resolved. So let me go ahead and run that again. And as you can see, as I hit enter, we're waiting, and all of a sudden we get the message 01. So as you can see, this concept of sequencing operations in a asynchronous world is something that is very helpful and very useful as we move onto network programming. Now let's take a look at those two ideas, put them together, and look at the case where you have to download a long list of links. We'll create two files. The first one will be exercise. Let me go ahead and save that. I'll call it exercise.js. I'll create another one, and I'll call this one run.js. In the exercise file, we'll start off by requiring request. We'll also require the file system package, which is part of Node, so there's no need to install this one. And the name of it is simply fs. We'll then create a variable called exercise, an exercise object where we will attach the functions that we will write in this file. And then we'll go ahead and write our first method. We'll call it exercise.get. To it, we will assign the following function. This function will take one parameter. The parameter will be the URL that we're looking for. And inside of it, we will create a new promise. We will return this new promise when this function is called. So I'm going to go ahead and return new promise, and then the promise signature of function, and then two parameters, which are resolve and reject. And as you recall, these are the two parameters that we use to explicitly specify when we resolve the promise or when we reject it. Looks like I got a parenthesis. I closed it too soon there. Let me go ahead and do that now. And now inside of it, we will make a request. We will do it in the same way in which we did in the example here. So I'm simply going to copy and paste this code into exercise. And let me go ahead and indent it so that it's easier to read. And as you can see there, we're going to use, instead of specifying that URL there, we will use the URL that is passed into this function here. And instead of writing to the console, if there's no error, we will resolve. If there's an error, we will reject. Now, before I can go ahead and use this function, I need to export what I want shared from this file. And so I'm going to do that next. And I'm simply going to share the exercise object. Now, from the run file, we'll start off by requiring exercise. Next, we will define a list of URLs, and I've written these previously. And then we're going to go ahead and call that function with the first element of that array. So we are going to, well, before I assign it, let me just go ahead and call it. This is exercise.get, the URL. And remember, this returns a promise. So I'm going to assign that to page. We're then going to use the then method. I will do that next. And inside of it, we're going to catch what comes back when that promise is resolved. So if there are no errors, this will be the body of the HTML page. So let me go ahead and enter that here. Body. And since this is a simple example here, we're not going to chain the promise any more other than this first method. And so if all goes well, I'm going to simply write to the console here the body of the page. Now, before I run it, I just noticed I have an error here. So I wrote URL, and it needs to be URLs in the first element, as I mentioned. Now I'm going to go ahead and run this. This will be run, not run, but node run. And if all goes well, we should see the body of the page. Yes, and you can see there all of this is the HTML of that first page of the MIT course catalog. Now, if we wanted to do multiple pages, we could, let me just change this back to URL. We could go ahead and wrap this in a for each function on the URLs array, like so. And then pass to that function, or we'll name the item that gets passed into the function URL. We'll also use the counter here. We will add the code that we wrote before to the body of the function. Now let's go ahead and save and run that again. And all of that HTML, and sort of endless, was just written to the console. You can see there how small my progress bar is. Now, if we wanted to save the content to the file system, we could add a function that does that. I'm going to go ahead and call it here save. And I'm going to assign that a function where I will pass two parameters, data, which will be the body of the page, and then the file name that I want to use. Now, as you might imagine, writing to a file is an asynchronous function itself. We will also use a promise in this case. So we will return a new promise, and we will enter the normal or the usual parameters that are used with this. We once again enter resolve, reject, and inside of that promise we're going to enter the code to write that file. And so I'm going to cut and paste that here, and as you can see there, we are using the file system package. We're writing a file. The first parameter is the name of the file. The second one is the content. We will pass both of those in. The second parameter is a function, the callback function. And as you can see there, it takes as a parameter an error. If there's an error, we reject. Otherwise, we resolved. And that means that the column function will receive a message saying the file has been saved. So let me go ahead and save that. Now let's go ahead and move back to the run file where we will call the save function. And now this will return, just like in the case of page, it will return a promise. So we need to handle that promise. So let me go ahead and just write the call here. We will call exercise.save, and we will pass to it the body and the file name. We will write that in a minute here. And let's go ahead and use as a file name the following. This is simply the folder where I'm going to save this, and every file I will name data plus the counter that we're passing in, and then the last part of that will be simply .txt, and I'm going to end my file name there. Now, because this is a promise and I want to catch back that successful message, I will return the promise and take one more then to it. Where I will catch that message, and inside of here I will simply write to the console the message. And that's pretty much it. Let's go ahead and review what we've done. We added to what we already had a call to save, which also returns a promise, which we then handle with one more sequence or one more step using the then method and catching that response that we will get back from the saving function. Remember, if everything goes well, we will resolve with the name of the file that was saved, and we will use that to write to the console. So let's go ahead and run that. I'm going to go ahead and bring down Finder so you can see here within the catalog folder if this is successful, the files being written. So I'm going to go ahead here and enter run, no run, and as you can see there, all three files were saved. So once again, to review, we started out with the very simple case where we created a request and we pulled back a page. We then moved on to a very simple example of promises which really did nothing. We then brought both of those concepts together in the exercises.js file, and we then created a request using a promise. We then saved to the file system with a promise as well, and then we wrote a little loop that moves through each of those addresses and pulls the page, saves the page, and writes some acknowledgments to the console. So with that, I'll wish you happy coding and goodbye.